Sarah Martinez looked like any other suburban mom dropping her 8-year-old daughter Emma off at Riverside Elementary School. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, she wore comfortable jeans and sneakers, and she drove a modest Honda Civic. The other parents barely noticed her as she walked Emma to the school entrance, giving her a gentle kiss on the forehead before watching her disappear into the building. What they didn't know was that Sarah had spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL, one of the few women to complete the grueling training program. She had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, led rescue missions in hostile territory, and earned commendations for her bravery under fire. But that was her past life, carefully tucked away behind her new identity as a single mother trying to give her daughter a normal childhood. Sarah had moved to this quiet town in Colorado 2 years ago, seeking peace after her military discharge. She worked part-time at the local library and volunteered at Emma's school. The other parents saw her as quiet, perhaps even timid. She rarely spoke up at PTA meetings and always seemed to avoid confrontation. When aggressive parents raised their voices about school policies, Sarah would simply nod politely and keep her thoughts to herself. Emma was everything to Sarah. The little girl had her mother's bright blue eyes and infectious smile. She was shy like her mother appeared to be. But Sarah knew better. Emma had an inner strength that reminded Sarah of herself at that age. The girl loved to read adventure stories and often asked her mother to tell her tales about brave women who saved the day. Sarah would make up stories, never mentioning her own real adventures. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in October. Sarah noticed Emma had been unusually quiet during their morning routine. Her daughter, who normally chattered about her friends and upcoming school projects, barely touched her breakfast and stared out the window with a worried expression. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. Emma hesitated, then shook her head. "Some kids at school are being mean. But it's okay. I can handle it." Sarah's protective instincts immediately kicked in, but she kept her voice calm and gentle. "What kind of mean? Can you tell me about it? They call me names and say I'm weird because I don't have a dad. Tyler Brennan is the worst. He pushes me sometimes and takes my lunch money. But Mrs. Peterson says we should just ignore bullies and they'll stop." Sarah felt her jaw clench, but she forced herself to remain composed. She knew that her military training had taught her to assess threats and respond accordingly. But this was her daughter's world, and she needed to handle it carefully. "Has this been going on for a while?" Sarah asked. Emma nodded. "About 3 weeks. But I didn't want to worry you. You already work so hard, and I know money is tight." Sarah's heart broke a little. Her 8-year-old daughter was trying to protect her from worry. She pulled Emma into a warm hug. "Listen to me, Emma. You never have to handle anything alone. I'm your mom, and it's my job to keep you safe. From now on, if anyone bothers you, you tell me immediately. Okay?" Emma nodded against her mother's shoulder, and Sarah could feel some of the tension leave her small body. That morning, after dropping Emma off, Sarah decided to have a conversation with Emma's teacher, Mrs. Peterson. She found the older woman in her classroom, preparing for the day. "Mrs. Peterson, I'd like to talk to you about some issues Emma is having with other students." Mrs. Peterson looked up from her desk with a slightly dismissive expression. She was nearing retirement and had dealt with countless parent complaints over the years. "Oh, you must mean the little scuffle with Tyler. Children will be children, Mrs. Martinez. Emma needs to learn to stand up for herself. We can't coddle them forever." Sarah felt her military bearing want to emerge, but she kept her voice level. "From what Emma tells me, this Tyler has been physically aggressive and taking her money. That's not a scuffle, that's bullying." Mrs. Peterson waved her hand dismissively. "Tyler comes from a good family. His father is on the school board. I'm sure it's just typical playground behavior. Perhaps Emma is being too sensitive." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained controlled. "I'd like to speak with the principal about implementing a proper anti-bullying protocol." "I really don't think that's necessary," Mrs. Peterson replied, clearly annoyed. Maybe if Emma was a bit more assertive instead of hiding behind her mother's skirts all the time. The comment hit Sarah like a physical blow. She realized that Mrs. Peterson, like everyone else, saw her as a weak, overly protective mother. The teacher had no idea she was talking to someone who had faced down enemy combatants and led men and women into dangerous situations. Sarah simply nodded and left the classroom. But something had shifted inside her. She wasn't going to let her daughter suffer because people underestimated both of them. Over the next few days, Sarah began to observe more carefully. She arrived at school pickup a few minutes early and positioned herself where she could watch the playground. What she saw made her blood boil. Tyler Brennan was indeed a bully, and he had targeted Emma specifically. The boy was larger than most kids his age, and he had 2 followers who helped him intimidate smaller children. Sarah watched as Tyler cornered Emma near the monkey bars, demanding her juice box. When Emma hesitated, Tyler shoved her, causing her to stumble backward. Emma's face showed fear, but also a glimmer of defiance that made Sarah proud, even as her protective instincts roared to life. The playground monitor was nowhere to be seen, apparently dealing with something on the other side of the schoolyard. Sarah noticed that Tyler was smart about his bullying, choosing moments when adults weren't watching. That evening, Sarah sat with Emma and gently drew more information out of her. The situation was worse than she had initially thought. Tyler had been systematically tormenting Emma for weeks, and it was affecting her confidence and her schoolwork. Emma had stopped eating lunch because Tyler often took her food, and she was having trouble sleeping because she dreaded going to school. "Mom," Emma said quietly as Sarah tucked her into bed, "do you think there's something wrong with me? Tyler says I'm weird because I'm quiet and I like to read." Sarah felt something break inside her chest. Her brave, beautiful daughter was starting to doubt herself because of this little monster. "Emma, look at me," Sarah said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. You're kind, intelligent, and strong. Tyler is picking on you because he's insecure about himself. Bullies target good people because they're jealous of qualities they don't have. But I'm not strong, Mom. I'm scared of him." Sarah took her daughter's hands in her own. "Being scared doesn't make you weak, sweetheart. Being scared and still doing the right thing, that's what makes you brave. And sometimes, when someone threatens the people we love, we have to show them that we're not as helpless as they think." Emma looked confused but nodded. Sarah kissed her forehead and turned off the light, but her mind was racing. She had tried to handle this through proper channels, but the school system was failing her daughter. Mrs. Peterson clearly had no intention of taking the situation seriously, and Sarah suspected that Tyler's father, being on the school board, was influencing how the situation was being handled. The next morning, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She was going to stop hiding who she really was. Her daughter needed to see that women could be strong, that they didn't have to accept being victims, and that sometimes you had to fight for what was right. Sarah had spent 2 years trying to be the perfect suburban mom, suppressing the warrior she had been trained to be. But watching her daughter suffer because of other people's assumptions about weakness had awakened something in her that had been dormant for too long. She spent that morning making phone calls and doing research. She looked up Tyler's family and learned that his father, Robert Brennan, was indeed on the school board and owned a successful construction company. The family had influence in the community, which explained why Mrs. Peterson was reluctant to address Tyler's behavior. But Sarah had faced more intimidating opponents than a small-town school board member. She had stared down warlords and survived firefights in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. A playground bully and his influential father were nothing compared to what she had already overcome. The breaking point came 3 days later. Sarah was running late for pickup due to a staff meeting at the library when she received a call from the school nurse. Emma had been injured on the playground and needed to be picked up immediately. Sarah's blood ran cold as she drove to the school, her hands gripping the steering wheel with the same intensity she had once gripped her weapon during combat missions. When she arrived at the nurse's office, she found Emma sitting on a cot with a bruised cheek and scraped knees. "What happened?" Sarah asked, her voice deadly calm as she examined her daughter's injuries. The nurse, a kind woman named Mrs. Collins, looked uncomfortable. "There was an incident on the playground. Emma says she fell, but..." She glanced around and lowered her voice. "Between you and me, Mrs. Martinez, I think there might be more to it. These injuries look consistent with being pushed." Emma looked up at her mother with eyes that were trying to be brave but couldn't hide the fear and humiliation. Tyler said if I told anyone what really happened, he'd make it worse tomorrow. That was the moment Sarah decided that her days of playing the meek suburban mom were over. Her daughter needed to see what real strength looked like, and the school needed to learn that they had seriously underestimated the wrong mother. Sarah helped Emma gather her things, signed the necessary paperwork, and walked her daughter to the car. But instead of driving home, she made a detour. She was going to pay a visit to Tyler's father at his construction company, and then she was going to have a very different kind of conversation with Mrs. Peterson and the school principal. As they drove through town, Emma looked up at her mother and noticed something different. Sarah's posture was straighter, her jaw was set with determination, and there was a look in her eyes that Emma had never seen before. It wasn't anger exactly, but it was something powerful and unwavering. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma asked. Sarah glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror and smiled, but it wasn't the soft, gentle smile Emma was used to. This smile had an edge to it, like steel, wrapped in silk. "I'm better than okay, sweetheart. I'm done letting people think we're easy targets. Tomorrow is going to be a very different day." Sarah's first stop was Brennan Construction, located in a sprawling industrial complex on the outskirts of town. The company's success was evident in the modern office building and fleet of trucks bearing the company logo. Sarah parked her Honda between two expensive pickup trucks and walked through the front entrance with the confident stride she had once used to enter hostile territories. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair, looked up with the kind of fake smile reserved for people she assumed weren't important clients. "Can I help you?" she asked, barely glancing up from her computer screen. "I'm here to see Robert Brennan. It's about his son Tyler." The receptionist's expression shifted to mild concern. "Is Tyler in some kind of trouble at school?" "Mr. Brennan is in a meeting with some important clients." Sarah's voice remained calm but carried an undertone that made the receptionist pay attention. "Yes. Tyler is in trouble. And Mr. Brennan will want to hear about it before it becomes a bigger problem." Something in Sarah's tone made the receptionist reach for the phone. "Let me check if he's available." After a brief conversation, the receptionist directed Sarah to a hallway lined with photos of construction projects and awards. Robert Brennan's office was at the end, behind heavy wooden doors that were meant to impress visitors with his success and importance. Robert Brennan was exactly what Sarah had expected. A large man in his 40s with the kind of confidence that came from never being seriously challenged. He was speaking loudly into his phone when Sarah entered, gesturing for her to sit while he finished his call about a $1 million contract. When he finally hung up, he looked at Sarah with the patronizing expression of a man who assumed he was dealing with an overprotective mother making a mountain out of a molehill. "Mrs. Martinez, isn't it? My assistant said this was about Tyler. I hope he hasn't been too rough with your daughter on the playground. Boys will be boys, you understand." Sarah sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, studying Brennan with the same intensity she had once used to assess enemy combatants. She let the silence stretch until he became slightly uncomfortable. "Mr. Brennan, your son has been systematically bullying my daughter for weeks. He's been taking her money, pushing her around, and yesterday he injured her badly enough that she had to be taken to the nurse's office." Brennan waved his hand dismissively. "Kid's roughhouse, Mrs. Martinez. Tyler's always been spirited, but he's a good kid. Maybe your daughter needs to toughen up a bit. The real world isn't going to coddle her." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. The suburban mom facade was slipping away, revealing the warrior underneath. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to give you one opportunity to address this situation properly. Your son is going to apologize to my daughter, return the money he's taken from her, and he's going to leave her alone from now on. You're going to make sure of it." Brennan laughed, a sound that carried years of getting his way through intimidation and influence. "Listen, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but you don't come into my office and make demands. Maybe if you raised your kid to have some backbone instead of running to mommy every time someone looks at her funny." He stopped mid-sentence because something had changed in Sarah's eyes. The mild-mannered librarian was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she could disassemble him without breaking a sweat. Sarah stood up slowly, her movements precise and controlled. "Mr. Brennan, I've been very polite up until now because I believe in handling things civilly first. But since you seem to mistake politeness for weakness, let me be clearer. She moved closer to his desk, and Brennan found himself leaning back in his chair without realizing why. I spent 12 years in the Navy SEALs. I've been in firefights that would make your worst day look like a vacation. I've led rescue missions in places where your son's worst nightmare wouldn't survive 5 minutes. I'm telling you this not to threaten you, but to help you understand that you're dealing with someone who doesn't intimidate easily. Brennan's face had gone pale, and his bravado was rapidly evaporating. Sarah continued, her voice never rising but somehow filling the room with authority. Now, your son has been hurting my daughter, and that stops today. You have 2 choices. Handle this quietly and appropriately, or I escalate this to the school board, the police, and anyone else who will listen. And trust me, Mr. Brennan, I'm very good at making my voice heard when I need to. You're threatening me, Brennan stammered, trying to regain his composure. I'm giving you information, Sarah replied calmly. What you do with it is your choice. But understand this. My daughter's safety is not negotiable. If Tyler touches her again, if he takes her money again, if he so much as looks at her wrong, you and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation. Sarah turned and walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Mr. Brennan? My daughter is tougher than your son will ever be. She just hasn't had to prove it yet. Let's hope she doesn't have to. The drive back to school gave Sarah time to center herself. She had revealed more of her true nature than she intended, but Brennan's arrogance had pushed her past her limit. Now she needed to have a similar conversation with the school administration, but she would handle it differently. Emma had been quiet during the short ride, processing what she had witnessed. Her mother had transformed before her eyes into someone confident and powerful. It was confusing but also thrilling to see that her quiet mom had hidden depths. Mom, were you really in the Navy? Emma asked as they pulled into the school parking lot. Sarah turned to face her daughter, choosing her words carefully. I was, sweetheart. Before you were born, I had a very different job. I helped protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Like soldiers do in movies? Something like that. But that's not who I am now. Now I'm your mom, and that's the most important job I've ever had. Emma nodded solemnly. Are you going to protect me like you protected those other people? Sarah felt tears threatening to form, but she blinked them back. Always, Emma. Always. The meeting with Principal Davidson went very differently than Sarah's conversation with Brennan. Sarah had done her research and knew that Davidson was a reasonable man who genuinely cared about student welfare. She also knew that he had been frustrated by the school board's tendency to overlook problems involving influential families. Sarah entered his office as the concerned parent she appeared to be, but with a quiet confidence that made Davidson pay attention from the moment she sat down. Mr. Davidson, I need to discuss a bullying situation involving my daughter Emma that hasn't been properly addressed. Davidson pulled out Emma's file and frowned as he reviewed the notes. I see there have been some incidents with Tyler Brennan. Mrs. Peterson indicated it was typical playground behavior. Mr. Davidson, with respect, Mrs. Peterson is wrong. Tyler has been physically assaulting my daughter, extorting money from her, and causing her significant emotional distress. Yesterday's incident resulted in injuries that required the nurse's attention. Sarah placed photos on Davidson's desk that she had taken of Emma's bruises and scraped knees. She had learned in the military to document everything. This is serious, Davidson said, studying the photos. Why wasn't I informed immediately? Because Mrs. Peterson dismissed it as children being children, and I suspect Tyler's father's position on the school board influenced her decision. Davidson's jaw tightened. This was exactly the kind of situation that made his job difficult. He was caught between protecting students and dealing with political pressure from the school board. Mrs. Martinez, I want to handle this properly, but I need to follow protocol. I'll need to interview both children and any witnesses. I understand, and I appreciate that, Sarah said. But I need you to understand something else. My daughter has been suffering for weeks because the adults responsible for her safety failed her. That ends today. One way or another. There was something in Sarah's tone that made Davidson look at her more carefully. She didn't sound like a typical frustrated parent. She sounded like someone who was accustomed to taking decisive action when systems failed. What exactly are you saying, Mrs. Martinez? I'm saying that if this school can't protect my daughter from a bully, then I'll have to take steps to ensure her safety myself. I'd prefer to work within the system, but my daughter's well-being is my priority. Davidson nodded slowly. He had dealt with enough parents to recognize when someone was serious, and Sarah Martinez was clearly not making empty threats. Give me 24 hours, he said. I'll conduct a full investigation. And if what you're telling me is accurate, Tyler will face appropriate consequences. And Mrs. Peterson? Mrs. Peterson will receive additional training on recognizing and addressing bullying situations. Sarah stood up and shook Davidson's hand. Thank you, Mr. Davidson. I hope we can resolve this quickly and quietly. After leaving the principal's office, Sarah picked up Emma from the nurse's station where she had been waiting. As they walked through the hallway, Sarah noticed that some of the other parents were looking at her differently. Word traveled fast in a small school, and somehow her visit to Brennan Construction had already become gossip. Mrs. Henderson, one of the PTA members, approached them near the exit. She was one of the parents who had always treated Sarah as if she were invisible or unimportant. Sarah, I heard you had quite the conversation with Robert Brennan today, she said with fake concern. I hope you didn't do anything you'll regret. The Brennans are very influential in this community. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face Mrs. Henderson with a calm smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mrs. Henderson, I did exactly what any mother would do when her child is being hurt and the system fails to protect her. Nothing more, nothing less. Well, I just hope you know what you're doing. Some people don't take kindly to being crossed. Especially by, she gestured vaguely at Sarah's modest appearance. By people like me? Sarah finished the sentence. Mrs. Henderson, you might be surprised by what people like me are capable of when we need to be. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the school entrance. Tyler Brennan was in the middle of pushing around another smaller child while his friends watched and laughed. Sarah watched for a moment, noting how Tyler chose his victims and how he positioned himself to avoid teacher supervision. Emma grabbed her mother's hand tightly. That's him, Mom. That's Tyler. Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her before action. She had identified the target, assessed the situation, and now, it was time to intervene. Emma, I want you to stay right here with Mrs. Henderson, Sarah said, her voice carrying an authority that made both Emma and Mrs. Henderson comply without question. Sarah walked toward the group of boys with the same confident stride she had used approaching enemy positions. Her posture was straight, her movements purposeful, and there was something about her approach that made the other children step back instinctively. Tyler, however, was so focused on intimidating his current victim that he didn't notice Sarah until she was standing directly behind him. Tyler, she said calmly. The boy spun around, expecting to see a teacher he could charm or dismiss. Instead, he found himself looking up at a woman who seemed much taller and more imposing than the quiet mom he had seen around school. You and I need to have a conversation, Sarah continued, her voice level but carrying an undertone that made Tyler's friends suddenly find reasons to be somewhere else. Tyler tried to maintain his bravado, but something about Sarah's presence made him nervous. I didn't do anything wrong. We were just playing. Tyler, your father and I had a very interesting talk today about the games you like to play. I think you'll find that the rules are about to change. Sarah knelt down to Tyler's eye level, bringing them face to face. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only he could hear. But there was steel in every word. Listen carefully, Tyler. Emma is under my protection now. If you touch her, threaten her, or even look at her the wrong way, you'll discover that there are consequences you haven't imagined. Do you understand me? Tyler nodded rapidly, suddenly looking very young and very scared. Good. Now you're going to walk over to Emma and apologize for everything you've done to her, and then you're going to leave her alone forever. Sarah stood up and stepped back, but her eyes never left Tyler. The boy looked around desperately for an adult who might intervene, But the teachers on playground duty were dealing with other situations and hadn't noticed the interaction. Tyler walked slowly toward Emma, his earlier confidence completely gone. Sarah followed at a distance, close enough to hear but far enough away to let Emma handle the moment herself. "Emma," Tyler said quietly, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry I was mean to you. I shouldn't have pushed you or taken your money." Emma looked up at her mother, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Tyler. "It's okay," Emma said simply. "But you can't do it anymore." Tyler nodded quickly and hurried away toward his own mother's car, glancing back nervously at Sarah. As they walked to their own car, Emma looked up at her mother with new eyes. The quiet, gentle mom was still there. But now Emma could see the strength that had always been underneath. "Mom, how did you make him apologize like that?" Sarah smiled as she opened the car door for Emma. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people who think they're tough are really just bullies themselves. And bullies are usually cowards when someone stands up to them properly." As they drove home, Emma was quiet, processing everything that had happened. Her mother had revealed herself to be someone completely different from who Emma thought she was, and yet somehow still exactly the same loving, protective mom she had always known. "Mom?" Emma said as they pulled into their driveway. "Yes, sweetheart? I'm proud that you're my mom." Sarah felt her heart swell as she turned off the engine. "I'm proud that you're my daughter too, Emma. And I promise you, no one is ever going to make you feel small or scared again." But even as she said it, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. She had revealed her true nature to protect Emma, and word would spread quickly through the small town. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Sarah would have to decide how much of the warrior she was willing to let the world see. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call that would change everything. Sarah was making breakfast when her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Detective Ray Cooper with the County Sheriff's Department. I need to speak with you about an incident involving your daughter and Tyler Brennan." Sarah's blood ran cold. Had Tyler's family somehow twisted the situation to make her look like the aggressor? "What kind of incident, Detective?" "Ma'am, Tyler Brennan was found tied up in his family's barn last night. He claims you threatened him at school yesterday and that he's afraid you might hurt him. His father wants to press charges for intimidation and making terroristic threats." Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had expected retaliation, but she hadn't expected them to involve law enforcement quite this quickly. "Detective Cooper, I'd be happy to speak with you, but I think there's more to this story than the Brennans are telling you." "I'm sure there is, ma'am. Can you come down to the station this morning? And Mrs. Martinez, you might want to bring a lawyer." After hanging up, Sarah sat down heavily at her kitchen table. Emma was still getting ready for school upstairs, unaware of this new development. Sarah had handled interrogations before, but always from the other side. Now she was potentially facing criminal charges for protecting her daughter. Her phone rang again, this time showing Principal Davidson's number. "Mrs. Martinez, I've completed my investigation into the bullying allegations. You were absolutely right about everything. Tyler has been systematically targeting Emma and several other students. I was prepared to suspend him and require counseling. But now we have a bigger problem." "The police call? Robert Brennan is claiming you threatened his son and demanding that you be banned from school property. He's also threatening to sue the school district if we don't take action against you. I'm going to need you to come in for a meeting with the school board this afternoon." Sarah realized that her decision to confront the situation directly had escalated beyond what she had anticipated. But she also knew that backing down now would only embolden people like Brennan and teach Emma that bullies ultimately won. "Mr. Davidson, I'll be there. But I want you to know that everything I did was to protect my daughter after the school failed to do so. I have documentation of Emma's injuries and witnesses to Tyler's behavior. I believe you, Mrs. Martinez. But this situation has gotten complicated very quickly." After getting Emma safely to school with a trusted friend's mother, Sarah drove to the sheriff's station. She had dressed carefully in a conservative business outfit, wanting to project respectability and competence, rather than the suburban mom persona she had been cultivating. Detective Cooper turned out to be a grizzled veteran in his 50s, who had probably seen every kind of case the county had to offer. He led Sarah into an interview room and offered her coffee, which she declined. Mrs. Martinez, before we start, I want you to know that I've already talked to several people about this situation, including Principal Davidson and some of the other parents at the school. I'm getting a picture that's pretty different from what the Brennans are claiming. Sarah felt a small measure of relief but kept her expression neutral. I'm happy to tell you exactly what happened, Detective. Let's start with your background. I ran your name through our system and found something interesting. You're former military, aren't you? I served 12 years in the Navy, Detective. I was honorably discharged and have a clean record. Cooper nodded and made a note. Navy SEALs, according to what I found. That's pretty impressive for anyone, let alone a woman. Sarah realized that Cooper had done his homework and probably already knew most of what he was going to ask her. It was a different life, Detective. I'm just a mom now, but once a SEAL, always a SEAL, right? That training doesn't just go away. No, it doesn't. But I've never used my training to hurt anyone who didn't deserve it, and I certainly didn't hurt Tyler Brennan. Cooper leaned back in his chair. Tell me about your conversation with Robert Brennan yesterday. Sarah recounted the meeting in detail, being careful to stick to the facts and avoid any interpretation that might sound threatening. When she finished, Cooper was nodding slowly. And then you went to the school? I spoke with Principal Davidson about the bullying situation, yes. And then I saw Tyler bullying another child right in front of the school, so I intervened. How did you intervene? I told him to apologize to my daughter for what he had done to her, and I made it clear that the bullying needed to stop. Cooper studied her for a long moment. Mrs. Martinez, Tyler claims you grabbed him and whispered threats about what you would do to him if he didn't leave your daughter alone. I never touched Tyler, Detective. I knelt down to his eye level and spoke to him firmly but quietly. I told him that Emma was under my protection and that there would be consequences if he continued to bully her. What kind of consequences? Sarah chose her words carefully. I told him that I would take whatever steps were necessary to protect my daughter. I never specified what those steps might be. Cooper made more notes, then looked up at her. Mrs. Martinez, I've been doing this for 25 years. And I've learned to spot when someone is lying to me. You're not lying, but you're also not telling me everything. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Detective, I'm a trained warrior who has spent the last 2 years pretending to be a helpless suburban mom because I wanted my daughter to have a normal childhood. Yesterday, I realized that sometimes you can't have normal and safe at the same time. I may have been more intimidating than I intended, but I never threatened violence against a child. But you're capable of violence. When necessary to protect innocent people, yes. But Tyler Brennan is an 8-year-old boy, Detective. The idea that I would hurt a child is ridiculous. Cooper closed his notebook. Mrs. Martinez, I believe you, but here's the problem. Robert Brennan has a lot of influence in this county, and he's demanding that I arrest you for intimidation. He's also claiming that Tyler is so traumatized that he's having nightmares and refusing to go to school. Detective, have you considered the possibility that Tyler is lying? Or that his father is coaching him to say these things? If you considered the side, I have considered that. In fact, I interviewed Tyler separately from his parents, and his story kept changing. I also talked to some of the other kids at school, including the boy you saw Tyler bullying yesterday. They all confirm that Tyler has been terrorizing smaller kids for weeks. Sarah felt a surge of hope. So, I was just protecting my daughter? I know that Tyler Brennan is a little monster who has been hurting other kids, and his father is trying to use his influence to avoid taking responsibility for it. But I also know that you scared that boy badly enough that he's afraid to leave his house. Cooper leaned forward. Here's what I think happened. You went into full SEAL mode without realizing it. You probably looked and sounded like you could dismantle that kid without breaking a sweat. To an 8-year-old bully who has never met anyone tougher than him, that would be absolutely terrifying. Sarah realized he was probably right. She had tried to intimidate Tyler just enough to stop his behavior, but she had underestimated how her military bearing and controlled intensity would affect a child. So what happens now? Now I have to decide whether to arrest you or not. The Brennans want me to charge you with intimidation and making terroristic threats. But I've got a stack of witness statements saying Tyler has been assaulting other kids, and I've got a decorated Navy SEAL who was trying to protect her daughter from a bully. Cooper stood up and paced to the window. Mrs. Martinez, I've got 2 kids of my own, and if some little psychopath was hurting them the way Tyler hurt your daughter, I'd want to do exactly what you did. The difference is, I'm not trained to be as effective at intimidation as you are. So what's your decision? I'm not going to arrest you, but I am going to strongly suggest that you find a way to resolve this situation before it gets worse. Robert Brennan isn't going to let this go, and he's got friends in high places. Sarah shook hands with Detective Cooper and left the station feeling both relieved and apprehensive. She had avoided criminal charges, but the war with the Brennans was far from over. The school board meeting that afternoon was held in the district's administrative building, a sterile conference room that felt more like a courtroom than an educational facility. Robert Brennan was there with his lawyer, a sharp-dressed man who specialized in intimidating people with lawsuits. Principal Davidson sat at one end of the table looking uncomfortable, while 5 school board members occupied the other end. Sarah entered the room alone, having decided against hiring a lawyer for this meeting. She wanted to face this as Emma's mother, not as someone hiding behind legal representation. Board Chairman Dr. Patricia Wells called the meeting to order and explained that they were there to discuss allegations of inappropriate behavior by a parent on school property. Brennan's lawyer immediately launched into a prepared statement about how Sarah had used her military training to terrorize and threaten a child, creating a dangerous environment at the school. He demanded that Sarah be banned from school property and suggested that Emma should be transferred to another school for the safety of other students. When he finished, Dr. Wells turned to Sarah. Mrs. Martinez, how do you respond to these allegations? Sarah stood up slowly, drawing on every ounce of dignity and authority she possessed. When she spoke, her voice carried the confidence of someone who had briefed generals and addressed troops before dangerous missions. Dr. Wells, members of the board, I'm here because this school district failed to protect my daughter from a systematic campaign of bullying and violence. When I tried to address the situation through proper channels, I was dismissed and told that my daughter needed to toughen up. She placed a folder on the table containing photos of Emma's injuries, documented incidents, and witness statements. Tyler Brennan has been physically assaulting my daughter for weeks. He has extorted money from her and caused her significant emotional distress. When the school failed to address this despite clear evidence, I took appropriate action to protect my child. Board member James Morrison, who owned a local hardware store, spoke up. Mrs. Martinez, no one is disputing that Tyler may have been rough with your daughter, but did you really think it was appropriate to threaten an 8-year-old child? Sarah's eyes flashed. Mr. Morrison, I never threatened Tyler. I made it clear that his behavior toward my daughter had to stop, and I used the tone of voice necessary to ensure he understood the seriousness of the situation. Robert Brennan couldn't contain himself any longer. She's a trained killer. She used military intimidation tactics on my son. The room fell silent. Sarah turned to look at Brennan directly, and when she spoke, her voice was ice cold. Mr. Brennan, I am indeed trained in combat. I spent 12 years serving this country in places you can't imagine, protecting the freedom that allows you to sit in this room and make false accusations. But more importantly, I'm a mother whose child was being hurt, and you failed to stop it when I asked politely. She turned back to the board. I gave Mr. Brennan the opportunity to handle this quietly and appropriately. When he chose to dismiss my concerns and insult both me and my daughter, I made it clear that I was not someone who would simply go away and let my child continue to suffer. Board member Sarah Kim, a retired teacher, asked, What exactly did you say to Tyler? I told him that Emma was under my protection and that there would be consequences if he continued to hurt her. I spoke firmly but never raised my voice, and I never laid a hand on him. But you intimidated him, Brennan interjected. Sarah turned to face him again. Mr. Brennan, your son has been intimidating smaller children for weeks. The difference is that when he tried to intimidate me, he discovered that he had picked the wrong target. Dr. Wells called for order and asked Principal Davidson to present his findings from the investigation. Davidson's report was thorough and damning. documenting not just Tyler's treatment of Emma but his pattern of bullying other students as well. In conclusion, Davidson said, while Mrs. Martinez's intervention was unorthodox, it was the result of our failure to adequately protect her daughter, despite clear evidence of ongoing bullying. The board deliberated for only 20 minutes before returning with their decision. Dr. Wells addressed the room formally. The board finds that while Mrs. Martinez's methods were perhaps more direct than we would prefer, her actions were those of a parent protecting her child after the school system failed to do so adequately. We will not be banning Mrs. Martinez from school property. She turned to Robert Brennan. However, Tyler will be suspended for 1 week and required to undergo counseling before returning to school. Additionally, he will be monitored closely for any further bullying behavior. Brennan's face turned red with rage. This is unacceptable. I'll be speaking to the superintendent, and I'll be consulting with my attorney about a lawsuit against both Mrs. Martinez and this school district. Sarah stood up as the meeting was adjourned. As Brennan stormed past her toward the exit, she spoke just loudly enough for him to hear. Mr. Brennan, you're welcome to file whatever lawsuits you want. But I suggest you teach your son to pick on someone his own size from now on. 3 weeks later, life had settled into a new rhythm. Emma was thriving at school, her confidence restored, and her grades improving. Tyler had returned after his suspension but was a changed child, polite and subdued. Word of what happened had spread through the parent community, and Sarah found that other parents now treated her with a respect that bordered on awe. The real change was in Emma. She had seen her mother stand up to bullies and refuse to back down, and it had awakened something brave in her own heart. She was still the same sweet, book-loving girl she had always been. But now, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that reminded Sarah of herself at that age. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Sarah was reading in their backyard when Emma approached her with a serious expression. "Mom, I wanted to thank you for what you did." Sarah looked up from her book. "What do you mean, sweetheart? You could have just moved me to a different school or homeschooled me or something. But instead, you showed me that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's scary." Emma sat down next to her mother on the porch swing. "And I wanted you to know that I'm not ashamed that you were a soldier. I think it's the coolest thing ever." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. "Emma, I've been many things in my life, but being your mom is the best thing I've ever done." "Mom? Yes? If someone ever tries to bully me again, I'm not going to just take it. You taught me that being kind doesn't mean being weak." Sarah pulled Emma close and held her tight. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. Being kind and being strong aren't opposites. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to let bad people hurt good people." Quote, as they sat together watching the sunset, Sarah reflected on how much had changed. She had spent 2 years trying to hide who she really was, thinking that would give Emma a better life. But in the end, Emma needed to see all of her mother, including the warrior who would move heaven and earth to protect the people she loved. The quiet suburban mom was still there, but now she coexisted with the Navy SEAL, who had never really gone away. And Emma, who had always been stronger than anyone realized, was learning that she could be both gentle and fierce, just like her mother. That night, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter looked up at her with bright, confident eyes. "Mom, I love you exactly the way you are. All of you." Sarah kissed Emma's forehead and turned out the light, knowing that they had both learned something important about strength, courage, and the power of refusing to let anyone make you feel small. Outside, the Colorado mountains stood silhouetted against the starry sky, solid and unmovable, just like the bond between a mother and daughter who had discovered they were both stronger than the world had ever imagined.